This week on To the Contrary.
First, should the U.S. send special forces to Nigeria to save the schoolgirls? Then, teen pregnancy rates hit a new low. Behind the headlines, for Mother's Day, a look at the fertility industry.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the future of Nigerian schoolgirls. American military, law enforcement, and hostage negotiators are in Nigeria to help find the nearly 300 abducted schoolgirls. The move comes after Senators Barbara Mikulski and Susan Collins brought the women of the Senate together to send a letter to President Obama urging him to join recovery efforts. They also called for increased sanctions against the terrorist group Boko Haram, which has taken responsibility. And the Senate unanimously passed a resolution condemning the terrorist action and encouraging both the U.S. and Nigerian governments to strengthen efforts to protect girls' education.
We need to speak up as a nation, women and men together, saying, what is this, where a girl can't go to school simply because she's a girl?
Senators also reintroduced the International Violence Against Women Act this week.
It establishes that it is the policy of the United States to take action to prevent and respond to violence against women and girls around the globe. Such violence contributes to inequality and political instability, making it a security issue as well as a moral issue for all of us.
Nicole Lee, outgoing president of Trans-Africa, says while the abductions are on another continent, this is an issue that impacts American women and men.
Miseducation or the lack of education of women and others is a global problem. If we don't take ownership of the situation, there are going to be repercussions here, both economic and political, but frankly, it's who we are.
So, Ritu Sharma, welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Should we be doing more for these schoolgirls, like sending in special forces?
Absolutely. There's no question we should be doing more for these schoolgirls. But as the recent panelists just said, there's a lot at stake for us. But what we've got to do is deal with the immediate needs of these girls and getting them back, but also the underlying issues.
I think there's a great deal more we can do, and I think just sending in such special forces isn't quite enough, but I don't agree that we should jump the gun and go ahead and say, let's send them in, just like SEAL Team 6, with Osama bin Laden. It would be wonderful. It would be great to get these girls back. This is an issue that pulls at our heartstrings, but I don't think it's always the answer to just jump on military intervention.
Well, I think we need to do everything humanly possible to locate these girls and to bring them back home.
We have to continue the public outcry, and we have to make sure that things like this don't continue to persist.
Well, you say, yes, forces in. I mean, special forces would sort of be an invasion. And should this kind of action in another country routinely become part of our public policy?
Absolutely.
That we absolutely not?
Absolutely not. Us going and nation building abroad, I've said before and again, it just cannot happen. We have issues here, such as sex trafficking here, poor uneducated women here, and men, that we need to tackle. The rest of the world shouldn't look at the United States as a savior. I agree, this is a horrible issue. Getting these girls back safe and sound is a priority, but us always leading the charge isn't quite the way.
I agree with that. I think that sending in military troops to take care of this is not the answer. The answer is to help and push the Nigerian government to deal with this. They have the military, they have the security, they have the ability to get these girls out.
Yeah, but apparently they had a 4-hour heads up that this was coming, and they did nothing.
They did nothing.
And they don't want us to invade or anybody's help. They're still a member of the British Commonwealth. The UK sent in advisors as well, military advisors. but they're sitting there and doing nothing and trying to pretend like it's going away.
Exactly. And that's where the pressure has to be. It's got to be on the Nigerian government. The Bring Back Our Girls campaign, that was started by Nigerian women and Nigerian mothers. That didn't come from the outside. Nigerians want their government to do what's right on their behalf.
Is it possible when you have a developing nation with, a weak government, it's kind of an open market for Al-Qaeda and their ilk to get in there and establish training camps? The girls are probably at this point mainly out of the country. Yeah. They're separated out, been sold into slavery and across the border. Yeah. Are they ever going to get them back?
Let's hope so. I mean, of course, the Nigerians want their government to do a better job of being proactive in terms of protecting their citizenry. But the reality is that politics is in the way. 2015 is an election year in Nigeria, and this government doesn't want to look as if they're disempowered and unable to really handle their own business. And that's why I think they were pushing away help from other countries. At this point, though, the priority needs to be to get these girls back. And so, for example, the women of the CBC, led by Marcia Fudge, says that we need to encourage the African Union, for example, to come together so that multiple countries can look for these girls and make sure that they have joined efforts to bring them back home.
Like, what happened in Nigeria is like the worst case scenario every parent fears. You put your kids in education hoping that they're going to have a good future, and these horrible people take them away. And I think injustice anywhere is a problem, and we have to do everything possible to bring back these girls. But this is a bigger issue that we were talking about before, that there is a lot of human trafficking, and people want to forget that slavery still exists today, and we need to do more.
Bigger than it was before the internet.
Here in the United States and across the world, and we need to do more to bring attention to this issue and stop it before it gets even worse and not have this happen again.
But this clearly was a social media movement that welled up and forced us and other countries to do something. Shouldn't, and you deal with this on a regular basis, shouldn't treatment of women and girls be as important as any other public policy issue and determine whether we get into fights or not?
Absolutely. And so the International Violence Against Women Act, which got reintroduced into the Senate yesterday, will do that. It would make it the law of the United States that the U.S. government will respond quickly and effectively when there are outbreaks of extreme violence against women and girls. And this is exactly one of those cases. If IVAWA were law, we wouldn't have waited 3 or 4 weeks for the administration to make a comment and then decide to send a few analysts over to help the Nigerian government.
But I also think Nigeria has to take more responsibility. Only 4% of girls have a post-secondary, more than secondary education. No, this is a country where you're not using half of the capital of your own country of empowering these women. So these countries have to take responsibilities for themselves and do a better job of protecting their own.
Yeah, but you can say that, but it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
But we need to put some international pressure. But where does it start? We can't protect. America can't be everywhere. We have to put pressure.
Can't change it overnight.
Yeah.
Here's the thing.
But you were raised as a Muslim. When you see Islamic terrorists like this, and you see an open market like Nigeria, a country that's got a weak leadership and no money, what do you think?
Well, I'm actually a Jain, but I was raised amongst some Muslims. And yes, again, just the hijacking of Islam by its most fanatical members has led to these groups that mirror Al-Qaeda to go in and essentially spread their values in places that there's not much infrastructure. And they're doing things for those communities, and they're the only people getting things done. I think that's what's most disturbing. In my parents' native India, you got things done over there by bribes when the government wouldn't do things, and when society wasn't coming up because of those things. So I think it's really troubling that in today's day and age these problems exist, but I don't think we're the answer to all that. And the U.S. intervention, there needs to be a diplomatic strategy. I think that's what we're looking at. There's been a lack of diplomatic strategy in this, and that's why we're sitting here and these girls are still missing.
Agree.
There is actually a lot more we can do to go to the heart of this issue. Nigeria is rich in oil. There's no reason that country should be poor. But the U.S. trade agreement with Nigeria is that we'll take your oil, but we're not going to take your agricultural products, which is what all the poor people in that country do. And so we've created this situation where we've emboldened this government and disenfranchised the poor. We've helped set it up so that Boko Haram could come in and give people something, give them some kind of hope, so that they are allowed to come into the country and develop a stronghold. Yes, there's more that we can do on violence, but we have to admit that we have a role to play in addressing the real underlying issues here.
And while we're looking at these long-term strategies, we can't forget that these girls are gone now. And as you've mentioned, they've probably been dispersed already outside of the country. I think if we have the ability to provide increased intervention, including military intervention, to get these girls back home, we shouldn't shirk away from that responsibility. I mean, when have we last forgotten our responsibility to be able to help people who, in other circumstances, are unable to help themselves? And I think we need to live up to that responsibility now.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To The Contrary. From kidnapped girls to teen pregnancy.
Rates of teen pregnancy, childbirth, and abortion have reached all-time lows according to a new report. Other studies have shown that teens are having fewer babies, but this analysis demonstrates it's because more teens are preventing conception. The rates are falling across all racial groups and in all states, but there are disparities. For example, white teen pregnancy rates are less than half those of Black and Hispanic teens.
So, Avis, what is going on here? Is it sex education proliferating, or possibly abstinence-only education, or is it the economy? Is it culture, a cultural change?
I think it's one word: contraception. Now, when you look at that specific report, what they find is at the same time that we're seeing pregnancy rates decline and abortion rates decline, we're seeing actually increased sexual activity among teenagers. So they're getting the fact that you can put in place methods that reduce unwanted pregnancy, namely contraception, and that's exactly what young people are doing.
This is a tough one, the issue of contraception. Wow. And to talk about, increased incidences of sexual activity, I think the root here is that this is a good thing. Obviously, this is good news. The Guttmacher report told us that 48% in 1982, up to 78%, 72% in 2006, 2010. These are the percentages which are growing of lesser teen pregnancies. And I think this is absolutely good news, any way you look at it.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of these, this report and a lot of other reports also say that there's not exactly one answer on why these numbers are going down. And you have states like New Mexico still has a problem, but Arizona, it's reduced a lot. So we have to, I think, go into it more. I think it also showed there's a lot of kids that are waiting. There's a lot more education on what does teen pregnancy mean to your life. And when you focus and educate people on education, careers, and what future do you want, I think they make better choices on what kind of life they want to build for themselves.
You know what I found very interesting about this report was that it wasn't just about abortion and teen pregnancy and contraception. It also played out the data on what happens, which has been around but has not been promoted or talked enough about publicly. What happens to the progeny of teenage girls? They end up being poor, not getting an education, continuing the cycle of violence, becoming, quite frankly, criminals and economic drains on society. So my question is, how could the right want to deny contraceptions to teen girls if we're ultimately saving all this human capital and also saving money?
I think you're making a very broad thing. I don't think people want to deny contraception. I think that
there's certainly large segments
that's a much more complicated issue. You're talking about a much more complicated. I think there's a lot of people that understand that giving people options is important, and the government does provide some of those services. The right gets concerned when you're forcing religious organizations to make judgments that they're not comfortable with. But I think the bigger, broader issue is that we're educating people. We're talking more about what choices are, what options they have, and education is a powerful tool for people to make the right decisions for themselves.
I think it's a great sign. There's no question about it because, excuse me, it is a sign that girls are more empowered to make choices about their futures. And they see a better future for themselves than they do if they got pregnant now. And they've got the means to control that. Again, I think what Bettina said is so critical. It's a holistic approach that works. Right. And when we're trying to find what that magic bullet is, we're actually doing girls and ourselves a disservice. I think that Guttmacher does a great service by showing the holistic approach and how effective that's been.
I think that's important, but if you look at some other studies, for example, one that looked at 18 and 19-year-old girls specifically, the particular age group that's most likely to be pregnant as a teenager, among that group of girls, their rate of usage of long-term contraceptives that is reversible has tripled in recent years, precisely at the time that we're seeing this reduction. So I think we cannot deny the importance of access to contraception, which is safe, which is reliable, in terms of explaining these numbers that we're seeing. And I think the last thing we need to do is to make it more difficult for girls to receive it.
And has access to contraception improved since the Bush years? Because during the Bush years, it was abstinence-only education.
Exactly.
And no access.
Exactly. Being open and honest with young people about how do you get pregnant and how do you prevent pregnancy, to me, is empowering young people with knowledge. And at the end of the day, that never hurts. It only helps.
Your thoughts on that?
I agree with, I think we're all on the same page on this stuff. Education is a powerful tool. We're a 30-year low because there's better science, there's better understanding, there's better education. I think involving the community, parents, your church, and getting people really involved on what it means to be a teen mother, how those options close you. And I think also it's very important we're talking about a lot of girls, but boys, educating boys on what it means to get involved in sex at an early age and being a father at an early age. I think it's very important we can't just focus, it's just a girl issue, it's a boy issue as well, and educating the entire community about this.
All right, behind the headlines. Mother's Day, approximately 4 million women give birth in the U.S. every year. Infertile women, or women with infertile partners, often turn to medically assisted reproduction. But are fertility treatments totally safe or transparent?
Miriam Zoll is a journalist and author. She's also one of the millions of women who've struggled with infertility. In her book, Cracked Open, Zoll explores the dark side of the process. Her journey began at 40 when she decided to start a family, but learned she couldn't conceive.
In the generation in which we grew up, we were socialized and trained to believe that if you have trouble conceiving, medical science will get us pregnant.
Zoll started IVF, or in vitro fertilization. She also sought egg donors, but those attempts proved unfruitful as well.
I started sinking into a very deep depression. I continued to believe in the fantasy that another egg donor might work for us. And I would go on the computer and pull up the egg donors on the egg brokers agency's website. And my husband would come in and say, "What are you doing? Get off, stop it, stop it, stop it." And I couldn't stop it. I had become addicted. I refer to myself as a fertility junkie.
Zoll began to see her experience as a symptom of larger, systematic flaws in the fertility business. The most glaring, a lack of regulation.
There's one piece of legislation introduced in 1992. It's called the Fertility Clinic Success Rate and Certification Act, and it requires the clinics self-report.
Zoll says couples are not always fully informed of or clear about their chances of conceiving through IVF. She'd like failure rates stressed rather than success rates.
There was a brochure in the clinic office that I went to that said 60% of women who go through treatments eventually end up with a baby. And I thought to myself, that's great news. I bet I'm going to be one of those women. Even though, again, that the doctor told us that our chances with IVF were low, when we moved into the donor egg phase, I was told that I had a 50% chance of conceiving. In reality, after I completed treatments and I found out about the global failure rates, which are estimated to be between 77 and 80%, I was stunned, because that information was conflicting with the information that the doctors had given us.
Zoll cautions the success rate of each cycle decreases. The failure rate increases as women age, but reproductive medicine continues to improve. The Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology reports 65% of women who seek IVF do give birth. Journalist Sandhya Graves' perspective on IVF differs from Zoll's. Despite her unsuccessful attempts to conceive, she has no regrets.
I would definitely do it again. There's no doubt in my mind I would do it again.
Graves has endometriosis. Doctors said that was the cause of her infertility. She chronicles her struggles in her book.
I had to really think, what is my goal? Ultimately, I want children, no matter if we adopt them, if someone else carries them.
Graves' first children, twins, were delivered via a surrogate.
The boys are Wyatt and Nolan, and they were born June 2012. And in November, I found out I was pregnant. It was a surprise.
It was Graves' fifth pregnancy, this time with no fertility treatments. She had a baby girl named Lily.
Sometimes it does take a couple tries. I say don't give up.
In 1978, the first test tube baby was born. Nearly 35 years later, more than 61,000 babies were born in the U.S. of IVF. But it's expensive and doesn't work for every couple. Zoll eventually adopted. She says, buyer beware.
There's many reproductive endocrinologists and their professional staff who work with them in the clinics who have their patient interests in their hearts and in their minds. There's also a number of doctors and clinics that are very much oriented to the business model.
So, Bettina, why no regulation? I mean, my God, they regulate hospitals, they regulate abortion clinics. Why aren't they regulating in vitro clinics?
I'll say, as someone in the early 30s, this segment scared the bejesus out of me because we haven't even started having kids yet. But I think this is an industry that we need to look into more. I think we definitely need more transparency. I think that parents or people that want to be parents, we need to make sure they make good consumer choices, but also make sure that we're not stifling innovation, because as we just saw, there's more and more science coming out every day, so there has to be some kind of balancing act.
Yeah, this is really, I feel for families who are going through this struggle, and I think that they are already going into this at a disadvantage because it is an emotional drain just as much, if not more, than it is a financial drain. So the fact that they may not be receiving all the facts from the beginning to be able to make the best possible choices for them as families, to me, is especially tragic.
Zoll said something really interesting, which is that she grew up with the belief that if she waited until her 40s to have children, this science society would allow her to have a family. That is a disservice that we have done to women in this country.
But I'm not sure where she got that impression, because I guess it depends on your OB-GYN, but mine, when I hit 35, he said, "You sure you don't want children? Because I don't want you coming back here in 5 years and asking me for in vitro, help that won't work." Right. And I said, "No, I am sure." Well, so I don't know where she got the idea.
I see it in young women in their 20s who come to me for advice and say, "Ritu, how do you do it? You run this organization, you have 2 kids." What I say to them is, you really need to think about building your career, but don't wait too long to have a family, because it's not just about you and getting pregnant, it's about that child. And does that child have to live with birth defects because you wanted to have that baby at 45? Is that really fair? So be intelligent, think about these things, but don't put it off into your 40s.
But, another thing a lot of career women find is that they can't find husbands in their 20s or 30s. So what should they go ahead and use a sperm bank, or just so they have a kid? Or?
I think they should be empowered to do what they want to do and not be judged for choosing single motherhood. Because it is one of the greatest things about being a woman and being a human is having children. Why should that be denied to women because they're single?
Gosh, where to begin on this? As someone who's getting married at the age of 30, one of those women who's raised with this feeling that I have to go build my career first, and then comes marriage, and then maybe children. We'll talk about it when we get there. And then what age will I be at that point? So I think it was something that was pushed around societally. That was sort of the feeling that I could get to 40 and still have children who are okay. I can still pursue IVF. I know so many people. I'm willing to bet around this table. We all know somebody who's pursued IVF and has been successful. But the realities of these clinics, there's a bad and dark side to it. As much as the business model it is, it's staffed by, many of these clinics are staffed by non-board certified physicians who haven't completed fellowship and special training in this. And then the self-reporting problem with these clinics, they're supposed to be publishing their success rates, and many of them are not.
Should they be required to publish their failure rates as Zoll would
I believe they should, and I'm no fan of too much regulation, but I think this is an area where it has not been looked at by Congress in many years, as we learn on this segment. So I think we do need greater regulation. And I come from a family of physicians, so I really feel that it's something that should happen to protect us women who certainly feel that this is something a part of our society now.
But I was confused. 77 to 80%, she said, global failure rate. Does that? But when you go to these clinics here in the U.S., they say 40, 50% chance of success. Is that the difference between domestic and international rates, or what is that?
Oh, certainly. I mean, there's no question that when we talk about other countries, Mexico or others, they don't have the technology.
All right, we got to get out. Sorry. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/To the Contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't get the difference.
I think it has
80% failure.
Well, because it's different. I mean, we were talking about this before. You go to Mexico to have IVF treatments.
Like my cousin just went through it, and they don't have as many reproducers we have here. They ended up adopting. But I think at the end of the day, we were talking before, be it if it was focused on success or failure, it's the same reason people play the lottery.